Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to Remaking the Economy, Caring for the Care Economy. I am Steve Dubb, Senior Editor of Economic Justice here at Nonprofit Quarterly, coming to you from Boston on land historically stewarded by the Massachusetts Nation. This webinar delves into the world of care work. This labor, done mostly by women of color, is often made invisible, performed quietly and cheaply by those at the margins of society who work hard without good pay or protections. How can workers in this sector come together to organize and counter this tendency of the nation's economy to devalue care work that is intrinsic to our survival? This webinar built on a conversation that we held on the care economy in last summer's NPQ magazine. And to discuss these vital questions today, we are joined by three expert panelists. Audrey Powell is at Cooperative Home Care Associates in the Bronx, in New York City, the nation's largest worker cooperative. Jen Stowe is Director of National Domestic Workers Alliance, and Mary Wilder is Board President of Shine Nurture Center. It's a childcare cooperative and part of the Co-op Cincy network in Cincinnati, Ohio. Before we begin, a few notes. First, we're very excited to take your questions, and we will leave considerable time for your questions. We'll start with our own, then get to yours. Please enter your questions in the question box at the bottom of your screen, and I will share as many of them as I can. Second, we will share the slides and recording after the webinar. I know there's always questions in the chat, will there be slides and recordings after the webinar? And there will. So I wanted to set that record straight to begin with. One last thing, this webinar is free, but producing it is not. So if you like what we're doing here at NPQ and would like to support NPQ's economic justice work, please consider making a donation to NPQ today. I also encourage you to join the conversation via social media. We have the hashtag rebuild the economy. And please also, at the end of the webinar, take the time to complete a brief 5-question post-webinar survey, which helps inform the future of our work. Thanks for joining us. And with that, I believe I want to start with Audrey. If you could talk a little bit more about yourself and the work of Cooperative Home Care.
Thank you, Steve, for first inviting me to participate in this meaningful dialogue. And I'm really grateful to be here in community with Jen and with Mary and contribute to this discussion based on my experience with the home care side of the care economy. So, as I said, my name is Audrey Powell. I am the president and CEO of Cooperative Home Care Associates, which is a 38-year-old home care agency that provides traditional home care services as well as fiscal intermediary services for the consumer-directed population. In consumer direction, that is where consumers who need the personal care services actually recruit, hire, train, supervise their own workers. We also are a training and workforce development program at Cooperative Home Care Associates. So we have the ability to train and bring more than 600 workers annually into this field to do this incredible work. And we can do that only when we can actually have enough money to attract workers to this job. And that's what we are facing right now with a lack of wages. It has become extraordinarily challenging to attract workers and retain workers in the care sector. The organization also is organized by 1199, so our home care workers are collectively bargained with local 1199 SEIU. And we train and employ workers to go deliver services that allow people to remain in their homes and their communities as they age and live with disabilities. So really helping them with everyday activities and managing their health conditions so that they're safe and able to live productive lives in their homes and communities.
Great. Thanks so much for that introduction. And Mary, could you introduce yourself and talk about a little bit about Shine and the Co-op Cincy network?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I am Mary Wilder. As stated, I am the board president of Shine Nurture Center Cooperative. I've been at Shine in Ohio for the last 4 years, but I have about 14 and a half years of experience in the childcare sector. Shine is a nature-based, holistic, child-led facility, which basically means that we spend most of our day outside, getting in touch with nature and teaching the children about nature. We pride ourselves on our low ratios and just the way that we connect with the outside world in our community. So that's a little bit about Shine.
Okay, thanks. And Jen, if you could introduce yourself and National Domestic Workers Alliance.
Thank you, Steve. I'm really, really happy to be with you all today, especially to be in conversation with Mary and Audria. I'm Jen Stowe, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. My pronouns are she, hers, and the National Domestic Workers Alliance, or NDWA, as we affectionately call it, it's a national organization of nannies, house cleaners, and care workers. We have over 400,000 domestic workers in our community across the country in all 50 states. We also have a network of 70 local affiliate organizations and chapters who are all working to improve the conditions for domestic workers and their work, and to work for the recognition and respect of domestic work in our society. We have been in existence for about 15 years, and we're growing stronger every day. As far as myself, I am a Southerner through and through. I am based in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm the granddaughter of a domestic worker. So I want to give a shout out to my grandmother, who is in Charlotte, North Carolina, Willie Stowe. She has a birthday coming up. She'll be 92. She really brings me to this work. I stand so strongly and firmly planted in her legacy. So all of my work is really, colored by her experiences and her guidance and leadership. They really flow through me. I'm also a mother to a 15-year-old daughter, and creating a better world for her is my North Star. So that's just really what brings me to this work. Deeply passionate about it and excited to talk about it too.
That's amazing. Thanks, Jen. I think I'll start with a broad question. So this term gets thrown around a lot, care economy. So there are many definitions of this term, of course. I'll start with you, Audria. How would you define the care economy? And, what would you say about its scale and some of the factors that are leading, to more and more employment in the sector?
Yeah, I think broadly defined, it really is the work that underpins this country. It allows for all other work to actually occur. And it's a huge driver and contributor to just the overall work of this nation. In the home care sector, there's incredible growth that's going on as our country ages. In New York State, where I'm focused, we have a huge growth need for home care services specifically, right? In New York State, the fourth largest population. New York State has the fourth largest population of older adults in the entire country. 16% of New Yorkers are over age 65. The older adult population is growing faster than any other segment in our state, and it's expected to grow to 5.3 million people by 2030, and 1.2 million of those are folks who will be over the age of 80. When surveys are conducted, you see 90% of people want to be able to age or live with a disability in their homes. People are not generally interested in having to be in nursing home kinds of settings or congregate care kinds of settings. We're all much more comfortable in our own homes and communities, and where we are connected to our loved ones and networks and the things that we know. This work is disproportionately done by women of color, immigrant women, and people of color. The job, unfortunately, historically, as folks will understand this because of historically who has done it, has been devalued and underpaid. And caregivers, paid caregivers really lack the support and have limited benefits and limited control over their work conditions. In New York, we're talking about a population that is has to survive. Like more than half, 57% of New York home care workers are reliant on some sort of public subsidies, and 49% lack affordable housing. So we're struggling to attract and retain workers for the growing population. And we are faced with, in New York State, the worst in the nation workforce crisis, as the other side of this is people needing more and more services. So we're seeing people with less access to the services, but more and more of a need is emerging.
Great, thanks. Jen, would you like to weigh in on this as well?
Yeah, when we say care economy, we're really talking about three things. So a robust federal paid and medical leave program, and strong universal child care, and also access to aging and disability care, especially in the home and community, as Audria noted. And lastly, like the thing that's going to underpin the entire infrastructure, which is fair pay, safety, and good jobs for the people who do this work, making sure that care jobs are good. We know that you have to have a thriving care economy for families to prosper. And we say that care work makes all other work possible. Audria, you are like, so my sibling in this. And so I appreciate you just highlighting everything that I was like going to say. Like, we're just totally in the same vein. We know that care investments, and when you make them, they support families, they strengthen jobs and the economy. And in COVID, we saw that they were truly essential and needed, and that the economy and society could not function without these jobs. And so we know that that we really need to fix the underpinning of the economy and the infrastructure for a few reasons. Healthcare and technology means that we are living longer than we ever imagined possible. I think it's like the average, we live an average of 20 years longer than we did when we first put those federal safety net policies in place. Every 8 seconds, someone is turning 65. Like, we're living longer, and we've essentially added a generation onto our lifespans, and we're going to need to be cared for, all of us. And the economy and the infrastructure right now around care is not completely set up to support that extension of life. And so, aging is actually living. You actually want to live. You actually need help to support yourself in that. And I think that one of the biggest opportunities that faces us is updating our culture, norms, policies, and systems to support that work and the extension of life that we're facing. And then one of the most urgent things that we need to do is really stabilize the care workforce, as Audria said, because we are going to need folks to care for folks as they age, and to care for folks with disabilities. And, all of us at one point in our lives will either care for someone, or we will be cared for. It's such a unifying experience for everyone. And right now, we don't give respect to the people who do those jobs. I think that the average wage of some of the care workers is like $18,000. Like, that's poverty. Those are poverty wages, especially in some place like New York. And so people who do this work as a calling can't even sustain themselves in the work, and they're not able to take care of their loved ones while taking care of folks in their day-to-day. So we really need to fix that in order to build the care economy that we all deserve, that we can see ourselves thriving in.
Great, thanks. Mary, you should feel free to weigh in on that, and if you want. And then also, I wanted to ask you about the story of Shine a bit. So you guys have converted from a private for-profit business into a worker cooperative, or I should say, a sole proprietor business into a worker cooperative. And so, what was that change like, and how did it change as a worker? Being in the business before it was worker co-op, and now after, and how's that transition been?
Um, I will say that the transition from sole proprietorship to worker ownership, it was a pretty smooth transition. At first, it seemed like it was smoother. We were finding within our first year, we just finished out our first year as the cooperative. So within that first year, having to set in stone our own policies and ways of doing things and branching away from the one owner perspective, which has come with its positive and its negatives. Now we have 4 worker owners that are making decisions for the business, which is better for the workers, but it can cause a bit of confusion if everybody's not on the same page. So we had a little bit of that in the beginning. And I think now that we've solidified ourselves as the owners and we've all gotten comfortable in those positions and speaking to our parents and our community, like everything is just falling into place now. And we're finding our own other issues outside of just from the transition. And to hit on the care economy and what you guys were speaking on before, you said something about universal childcare, and it just hit at my heartstrings because childcare is so unaffordable around the country, around the world. But during the pandemic, we saw how much of a need there was for childcare. Like you said, all these other workers can't go and do what they need if they don't have childcare, and it's affordable. So that is one of the things Shine is actually, our prices for childcare are pretty up there because of what we offer. We offer super low ratios compared to any other childcare facility around us. We offer a nutritious menu to our children with healthy, warm snacks and things. We garden, we spend most of our day outside, but finding a way for our community to be able to afford that care has been a challenge for us.
Thanks. And I think this is a good segue, because I wanted to ask about advocacy, and obviously government policy could make a huge difference on childcare. If I remember my stats right, like in Quebec, it's $7 a day is the maximum payment or something like that, because of government support, right? It's
Yeah,
not
and I mean,
magic.
we try to pay our workers as much as we possibly can. Like but in childcare, when you're talking about childcare workers and their teachers, like we are not in the same conversation of your regular teachers, where when you're talking about teaching and that field, we don't get lumped into that same conversation. We're an afterthought. So we have to fight extra harder for that funding than your normal schools and stuff. And there is funding out there, but you just have to dig for it and find it. But those are the things that we are seeing in childcare that workers need. They need higher wages. They need health care. They need more benefits. And so that is where Shine is at right now. We are trying to offer our workers that so that we can keep our workers and retain them, because that is one of the leading things that causes them to leave that workforce, is not being able, like Jen said, not being able to make enough money to take care of their own families, having to get a second or third job to do that. So Shine is not wanting that for their employees. We're doing everything that we possibly can to get everybody above $15 an hour, $16 an hour, just to try and level that out some where we can. And it's a
Yeah.
challenge without the funding or the advocacy. So since the pandemic, I've definitely heard more about childcare. The government in Ohio, they've been doing this hero pay thing where they're just giving workers that work in childcare extra money, because it's needed.
Yeah, thanks.
For us
So
in New
Jen, I
York
want to take it
State-
to you. Oh, go
Oh,
ahead,
I was just
Audrey.
gonna say,
Yeah.
for us in New York State, we've been on this 3-year campaign around fair pay for home care workers and working to raise the wages for home care workers to 150% of minimum wage in New York. along with adequate reimbursement rates, because much of our work is done in the Medicaid space. And so there's investment taxpayer dollars that are going into the system that should be flowing, that we need to have flow to the home care agencies and the workers to increase wages and compensation to bring the workers into this workforce. And while, it's incredible that we have such broad investment and such a big stakeholder group that is invested in it. And it speaks to what Jen was talking about, in that everybody is going to need care, or someone in their family is going to need care, and just how many people it touches. And, in New York, with Fair Pay for Home Care, we have bipartisan legislative support. We have, home care associations, providers, advocates, workers, just across the AARP, NAACP,
employers, right?
Organized labor, really working towards this together. And it's just such a critical issue that we need all of us, pulling to change what's been an underinvestment and undervaluing of this critical workforce. And to Mary's point, we were actually just in Albany on Monday, and I'm sitting with home care workers, talking to legislators, and listening to story after story of home care workers who have to work 7 days a week just to try to make ends meet. People who spend time away from their own children aren't able to take care of their own health needs because of the low wages and because they're not being fairly compensated for this work that they do.
Thanks, Audria. Jen, I did want to pass it to you. National Domestic Workers Alliance obviously does a lot of advocacy, you've had wins, things that haven't gone through, but, what are some of the ways that advocacy has begun to increase the value of care work? What are those wins? What has been achieved? And, just to make it a little more complicated, what are the continuing challenges, which obviously are many, so take
Steve,
out however you want.
We're not easily knocked down. So yes, we will keep fighting for sure, even more so in the coming years. I wanted to give some context to the workforce and speak to kind of some of the challenges that have contextualized the workforce and have stayed with the workforce. The domestic workforce has had a history of exclusion and sexism and racism surrounding it because farm workers and domestic workers were left out of the New Deal in the 1930s. So there was a humongous labor protections passed at that time, and domestic workers were not included in that. And so racial exclusion has defined how the workforce has been treated from the start, because Black enslaved women were doing that work, and they were doing it for free. And so it really how people not only see the work, but how people and the value of that work, but how folks see the workers and the value that the workers bring to their lives. And so domestic workers, because they were not included in the New Deal, this means that they were excluded from Social Security. They have largely no overtime protection, often don't have access to retirement. And at the beginning of COVID, we were surveying our membership, and we were surveying domestic workers to see, what was going on with them, how are they holding on to their employment or not. And we found that 82% of domestic workers did not have one paid sick day, and 90% of them instantly lost wages once the pandemic hit. And so I think that a lot of the challenges that have historically followed the workforce, we're still seeing today. And care workers, childcare workers were thrust into the spotlight during COVID, as Mary said. And investments in 3 pillars of care. So those things that I mentioned, childcare, elder and disability care, and paid family leave, were included in President Biden's budget, his agenda, and his the formerly known as Build Back Better plan So those care investments were included. It was a historic inclusion of investments. So they were included and they passed in the House at that time, but they were cut out of the final negotiations in the Senate. So they ultimately did not make it into his final plan. But there was COVID relief legislation through the American Rescue Plan Act that it was like $12 billion in Medicaid and disability, in Medicaid and elder care and disability care funding. All 50 states opted into that funding, opted into that pie of $12 billion. And they all did it with the goal of expanding, strengthening, and enhancing home and community-based services programs. So giving home care workers a raise or bonus pay or hazard pay. And so we know that the states have really opted into that funding. And so we will be working to really push for states to raise care workers' wages with the funding that they took. We're going to be really honed in on that because we know that that money has a time limit. They have to spend that money by 2025. So we'll be advocating for them to spend that money, but also looking ahead and looking forward. I think that the outcome of the midterm elections really renewed our mandate to double down on organizing, and continuing to center care and care investments. And so, Audria, you spoke to this, but care is a bipartisan issue. It's an issue that everyone can get behind. It's a majoritarian issue. So we will be working to make sure that that is felt across the country. And we're going to be working to ensure that we can build a big old care constituency because we know that we all need care or have been cared for. And we really need people to really understand it and align with a common sense that says two things. One, that, we all deserve care and the government has a role to play in providing it. And then the second thing we want people to really understand and align with is that the people who provide care deserve jobs that are good jobs. So jobs with living wages, the right to a union, dignity, respect, a safety net. And so we will really be working to make sure that care is in the air, per se. I have a colleague who says that, and so I can't stop saying it. And if I can speak to our political and advocacy arm, Care in Action, there's an opportunity to position care as a winning electoral issue. And we will be fully all in on doing so and positioning it as a political force. So we're going to be doing a lot of building, pushing for investments in care, making sure that people know that care work is essential and that care jobs are job enabling jobs. So they're even more important to us now than ever. And we'll be centering that in all that we do.
Great. Jen, actually, I want to follow up with an audience question that I think follows really closely on what we've just been discussing. So the questioner says, how can, and I know that you guys have done a lot of work, particularly in terms of narrative change. So I think this is an opportunity to speak up about that a little bit, but how can we flip the script is the question, so that childcare, education, healthcare become the economic drivers they could be. What would that look like, and what policies should citizens in this country be demanding?
Mm-hmm. I think that's such a good question, and I think we've made a lot of inroads. Like if you think about where the narrative, where it was positioned, 10, 20 years ago, people didn't really understand what domestic work was, or the term domestic worker was not like in our lexicon. And so we've made inroads just having folks understand that the work is real work. It's such valued work, like it's skilled work, it's incredible work and should be respected. And I think that some policies that will, examples of policies that will get us really closer in understanding how essential care work is, and that it is the beating heartbeat of the economy, are policies like Biden's recent policy around chips manufacturing and really tying a childcare component to that manufacturing and ensuring that with jobs that are mandated, so is like a mandate to provide childcare for the workers. As Mary said, like workers need real affordable like childcare. They need it to be able to go to work and contribute to the economy. And so I think that really we have to, the government has to really force mandates, in my opinion, and that'll allow folks to see that, this is actually essential. We've been kind of begging, like, please, like, please pay childcare workers fairly, like, please provide childcare, but I think it really needs to be mandated. That's why we really think there has to be a government intervention.
And just to sort of underscore, what Jen is saying, back in 2021, September of 2021, 1199, SEIU conducted a survey through the Heart Research Associates, right? And it was around the Build Back Better principles, right? Like the things that we're trying to be one in Build Back Better. 90% of people want to be in their communities and their homes when it comes to, this is specific to the home care side of, or the healthcare side of things. 85% of survey respondents believe that Congress should act on the Affordable Care Act. So there's a role. Government has to play in all of this. 79% believe that it was important for Congress to include long-term care. Long-term care. We are healthcare. Everybody, we've been able to raise visibility that home care and long-term care is a huge part of healthcare. And they believed it needed to be included. More than 60% believed that they were fairly likely or very likely for themselves or a family member to need care, right? To actually need long-term care. While only the reverse in terms of being able to actually access that care and find affordable care and reliable care, the numbers dropped to 11% that actually thought they would be able to access it and find reliable home care providers. So, there's a problem right there. We know that the need is there, but people are not going to either be able to afford it without government being involved. And this is something that we have to really listen to what the nation is saying, and push forward. And I agree with Jen, double down, we have to double down on this.
Great, thanks. Audrey, I actually wanted to follow up a little bit with you. And you just mentioned SEIU. I know you're a unionized worker co-op. What roles do labor unions play in the care economy now, and what roles could they play?
So I certainly think that the role that they play now is having a recognition for the work that home care workers and, the long-term care sector delivers. They work tirelessly to raise visibility, to increase awareness, to advocate on behalf of this workforce, work to ensure that the workforce has quality jobs, try to push for, compensation, benefits. They've got training and education funds that help support this workforce. And they play an essential role in it. I think, going forward, as a worker-owned cooperative, what could be really useful is to actually work in solidarity with the co-op movement, to really look at how we can expand co-ops in this sector, since many of the principles and goals and what we are trying to accomplish, utilizing home care co-ops around advancing wages, having workers have more agency and voice, participate in the governance of the organizations, really be successful alongside an organization as a co-op, as opposed to the work that's being done, actually leaving the communities that it's being done in, or at least the wealth and the revenue that's generated by the work that workers are doing in this space can actually stay in local economies and stay with the workforce. So yeah, for me, I think going forward, it's about being able to work in partnership, right? To continue to advance the message around the need for these services and the investment from government in our nation to improve the quality of the jobs overall.
Great, thanks. Mary, I know Co-op Cincy is connected to the labor movement for sure. If you want to add anything on that. And then there's also this question in the chat, which I think, is pertinent. It says, it seems worker-owned co-ops for both child and senior care providers accomplish many benefits and allow more of the money spent on childcare to go to the workers. That helps workforce stability. What are the biggest challenges to increasing their role in the care economy? So, either talk about the worker co-ops, anything you want to add on unions as well.
I don't have very much experience with the union. I was talking to some of my other co-op owners this morning about the union and some of the things that we feel like would be more of an advantage for us. And the biggest thing for us that we can see partnering with the union labor would be the healthcare portion of it. Just because we're such a small business, it would cost us so much money to offer that major medical to all of our employees. Like, the process of it would just be tedious without their assistance. But I don't have much personal experience on the unions myself. As far as being a cooperative and it having its advantages in the childcare center, that I would absolutely agree to that statement, solely because the workers have the knowledge, they have the firsthand experience of being in a classroom, and they know what they need and what is lacking from their management. So when you have the workers that are the owners, we fight extra hard to make our environment not what a traditional childcare environment would be, where you have the one director making all the rules and not paying their workers enough. So even though we have workers at Shine that are not worker owners, when we have our staff meetings, we take ideas to them, we ask them, we're listening to them when they tell us that they need something, and we jump right on that. Whereas when you have just one owner in a childcare business, they will normally take their time dealing with those smaller issues and only focus on the profits that they are making. Our first job at Shine is to protect our children, but also to protect our staff. That holistic side, we that starts at the top. If our teachers are not capable and ready and able to do their job, they can't protect those children in that classroom. So when they need something, we jump right in to assist them on that. So I think that is the biggest part of worker ownership in a childcare, is that we make those decisions for ourselves. We decide how our day is going to run, how our classrooms are going to run, and we appreciate that freedom.
Great. Anything, I don't know, Audria, that you want to add about, this sort of scale question? I know there are efforts to create, particularly in home healthcare, but also in childcare, worker co-ops. It's still a fairly small percentage of the sector.
Yeah, I would say, individual co-ops. So this connection to the union again comes up here, but individual co-ops cannot create significant system change on our own, right? Like, Cooperative Home Care is the largest worker-owned cooperative in the nation, and we stand at 1,800 workers now, post-pandemic. At our largest, we were 2,300 workers, and yet if that's a medium-sized home care agency, and think about just the number of businesses that are out there that are going to be much larger than that. So the path forward really requires deep collaboration amongst all sectors of co-ops, but also really building a comprehensive cooperative ecosystem. And so, there's been growth in the home care co-op space. But to really impact this industry, we have to have, much bigger numbers, much bigger size of the co-ops, much bigger market position, much bigger political influence. And that's why for me, I feel like there's this connection to labor, organized labor, where we can really amplify, if we're working in solidarity, we can amplify the scaling of worker co-ops in the care economy. And it will take that kind of effort to have real systemic change.
Great. So I'm going to some audience questions. There was a lot of interest in this question about, how do you, or if any of you work with undocumented workers? And, I imagine there are a fair number of undocumented workers in the care economy space.
Yes, we do work with undocumented workers, and we have many undocumented workers as our members. We know that folks who are undocumented are oftentimes the most marginalized. The power dynamics between employer and domestic worker at play in some of the most egregious ways. And so, yes, the answer is yes, we do work with undocumented workers.
Great. Another audience question, and I think I'm gonna throw this first to you, Jen, but others can jump in. But the question is, how can it says direct care, so I'm gonna say that's home care, but I'm not quite sure what the questioner means. And child care workers can work together to improve wages, working conditions, et cetera. I know there's the Caring Across Generations project, which is part of that, but how do you build these broader alliances so it's not just the child care workers and it doesn't have anything to do with elder care or vice versa?
Yeah, so we have the National Domestic Workers Alliance has really we have a lot of partners, but we have two partners who are really closely in our orbit, who focus on different constituencies of the care economy. And so we really focus on workers, care workers and domestic workers, and fighting with and alongside them. We have a partner organization called Hand in Hand. They partner closely with Audria on the New York campaign. Shout out to Alana. They are really focused on organizing employers and consumers and making sure that folks understand what being a good employer means. And we have Caring Across Generations. They really focus on organizing consumers, but family caregivers too, the folks who are doing caregiving work that is unpaid, like really building across generations, as their name says. I think it's so important, the question around how childcare workers and home care workers can work together. I think that there was also a question in the chat around how do we build and leverage state power, to kind of leverage and ramp up to these federal wins, because we know that sometimes, depending on the, political landscape, it may be hard to really shape and push through these federal wins, but we know we can win on the state level. And I think that the state level is where a lot of the partnership can really bloom between childcare workers and home care workers. And so we've been doing some of that work in key states, really trying to organize both in order to raise the wages for both, with the understanding that both are essential to the care economy. And we don't want to pit ourselves against each other. We work in deep solidarity, and we are kind of like driving that message. So I think that working together on the state level and organizing with each other, especially like to get the wages raised through some of that federal funding that I spoke about, are good ways for both sectors of the industry to collaborate and be in lockstep with each other.
Great. I don't know if Audrey, did you want to jump in on this one at all, or you don't have to, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jen hit all the points in terms of like the work together on this. And that's really where I see the essentialness of it, is like at the state level, just being able to work in collaboration and have these kinds of coalitions are what's going to help to advance it. And just thinking about where we have where we align in the two areas.
Yeah, and just also understanding that like home care workers or folks who provide direct care, they may be consumers of childcare and vice versa. So it's definitely an ecosystem and we all need each other. Just pushing that point. That's why we have to like stay in real close partnership and kinship with each other, knowing that, you know, the government can afford to raise the wages for all sectors of the industry, and they should. So we just have to keep saying that.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to try to combine a couple audience questions here. So there's a couple questions about, I don't know, challenges of bureaucracy. I don't know what else to call it, but there was one question about in Michigan, I've heard from home care workers that the state reimburses them months after they work. And so it's the relationship to state agencies sometimes holding back care workers from getting higher wages. And then there was also a question about managed care or organizations. And I know, Audrey, you have to work with managed care organizations, and that's been a challenge. So anything you want to say about that and where the lines of advocacy and policy change would be?
Yeah, absolutely. On the first point, yeah, the bureaucracy is, is like, it's incredible. And we think about like the wins that we get and going one step forward and then 3 steps back. I mean, just for us in New York State right now, last year's budget included a $3 increase for home care workers, $2 in October of 2022, $1 in October of 2023. Which we felt was like a down payment on fair pay for home care, which we want to see the minimum wage for home care workers go up to 150% of the current minimum wage. And our governor, very much spoke out about the fact that there needed to be investment in home care. We needed to have increases because of the skilled requirements needed for the workforce. This needed to be above minimum wage as far as a job, as far as compensation for the services that home care workers provide. And then we fast forward to this year's budget, and there's a proposal in her executive budget to increase minimum wage across the state, which is absolutely needed because the cost of living is so high. And in, retail, fast food, in many sectors of the economy in New York State, people are underpaid. And yet in her proposal to increase minimum wage, what she also did was to say, well, you know what, we're going to freeze the home care worker wages once we hit $18 for home care workers, there's not going to be a premium anymore. So the rest of the state would be increasing. And when the rest of the state got to $18, then everybody would move up in lockstep again together. So less than 9 months after saying that there should be additional wages for home care workers beyond the state's minimum wage, she's working to roll that back. So we were doing a lot of advocacy and work, organizing work around not having that happen. The piece about the bureaucracy and the managed long-term care plans is also a challenge. Last year in the budget, there was money that was put in for those $3 wages, right? The legislators said, hey, we need money. We need to increase the wages. And when those raises actually went into effect, home care agencies were responsible for paying the additional money, but we did not receive adequate reimbursement rates to offset those increases. So we're left subsidizing, drawing on lines of, credit, or going out of business if we can't, afford to make payroll because we are not getting the adequate money to offset those increases that we are required by law to put into place. And of course, we absolutely believe that those increases need to be there, but we have to have a system that ensures that the money gets to the providers so that we can continue to support the workforce that's doing this delivery of care.
Yeah, that's really important. Thanks, Audrey. There's a question here that I think is important about where do care workers that are working, not in home care or in child care, but in facility care, like the nursing homes, or long-term, assisted living or what have you. How do they fit into this care worker movement?
Audria, you should speak to this, but they're definitely in the movement. Some of those folks, those care workers who are in agencies, are organized by unions. Unions are like instrumental in ensuring that those workers can have their voices amplified and can really be on the path of good jobs and receive the dignity and respect they deserve too. And even if the workers within agencies aren't in unions, depending on where they are, a lot of times we'll organize alongside them. And so I definitely think that they're in the care economy infrastructure. The infrastructure is so broad. What they are fighting for and their needs may be a little different in the ask, but yeah, they're definitely essential.
Great. There's a question about cross co-op solidarity, and it's directed kind of at you, Audria, but I'm actually interested in hearing from Mary on this too. But like it says, what work has CHCA done to build relationships with limited equity housing co-ops, which of course are very common in New York City, and is there any place where like aging in place is a reality, like where we're actually doing the? I've heard of the phrase naturally occurring retirement communities. Is there like active work happening in that area?
So I think it's challenging because cooperative home care is set within the New York State like healthcare home care space, right? Heavily regulated. We are under contracts to manage long-term care plans, and do not operate, like we don't have a huge amount. We have a very small amount of like private duty business. So we're heavily reliant on the established network within New York State, like the Medicaid delivery system. Where we do connect as a co-op is through our membership with the U.S. Federation of Worker-Owned Cooperatives, and also connect to the there's a network of home care co-ops. And so, we very much participate with each other and share like ideas and ways in which we can try to make entrees into other areas. There's some limited work that we've done, like going into communities where there are folks who are aging and going into senior centers, trying to expand our connection in our business in those ways. But it's been challenging for us in New York, I would say, just because of the way that the home care system is set up.
Got it. Thanks. Mary, I'll change the question a little bit for you. So, like in terms of being part of the Co-op Cincy network, what does that mean? Who are you connected with?
Being a part of Co-op Cincy means that we're connected with all of the co-ops in our network. And for us, it just means we have to figure out like which part of the network, which co-ops should we form relationships with. But with the Co-op Cincy network and the way that they have it set up, like we're all helping each other. So like we all send in our funds and our fees and things, and if at any point like a co-op in our network is failing or they need some assistance, like they can pull from that money that is at Co-op Cincy or through Co-op Cincy. We've not had to experience that at all yet. But that's the kind of system that they have set up to where like I can go and reach out to one of the co-ops in our network and ask them to come partner with me to do something for our parents or for our staff or something like that. So I'm just now taking over that portion of Shine, and I'm about to start reaching out to the co-ops in the network to maybe help us with our food supply. There's a farming co-op in our network. There's a massage co-op in our network. Just things to help with our families, the ones that would benefit us the most. But Miss Ellen and Co-op Cincy have definitely set up that network to where like we can interchange with each other and bounce off of each other and get help from each other. So that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, I think
Great.
that whole ecosystem development is for us
Yeah.
as worker-owned cooperatives is
Yeah.
so incredibly important. And I do think, Co-op Cincy has done an amazing job, and, definitely we've got, the Federation of Worker Co-ops and ICA group that support, the expansion of co-ops.
Yeah, and they partner with the Business Legacy Fund, to help the co-ops get started. I mean, essentially without Seed Commons and Co-op Cincy, Shine would not have been able to transition to worker ownership. Like none of our workers would have had the amount of money that it would have cost on hand to buy into that share. So that was essential to us to moving to worker ownership, was having that support and that network and having them to be able to guide us and teach us. None of us have been business owners. So several of us have all been working in childcare, but we've not been business owners. So just learning and taking that education and that knowledge that Co-op Cincy is able to give us and putting us in touch with like all the right people for all of the things that we need. They've helped us with accounting, with conflict resolution and all of those things. So just being able to have somebody to reach out to has been a wonderful help to Shine.
Great. So we're running low on time. I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple more questions. One more for the audience that's directed really at you, Audria, which is you can give the 60-second story about how CHCA was able to grow to 1,800 caregivers, which is unusual for a worker co-op.
Yeah, I think it has to do with like timing and the New York, the New York market, and our visionaries who started cooperative home care. I should have said this at the top because Jen talked about the legacy of her grandmother being in domestic work, and I should say the shoulders I stand on are my mother's as one of the founding members of cooperative home care. But we also had the fortunate opportunity for those visionaries who started cooperative to think about how we could ensure that that we would grow to provide services. So we also developed our own managed care company in 2000, which helped us to grow. But, it was leveraging the work that our home care workers did that allowed us to have certain preferential contracts with certified home care agencies, and then ultimately developing the managed long-term care that fed CHCA the business. And so that allowed us to grow, plus having a training program that we could recruit and bring people into this work. So.
Great, thanks. So one last question really quickly, I think. If there's one thing, name one thing that you would like to see nonprofits or philanthropy do to help support the care worker movement. And whoever wants to go first.
I would like to see philanthropy really organize peers and partners around funding this work in ways that are not usually thought of. A lot of people put the care economy and care work squarely in gender justice frame. A lot of people put it in care, but it's also like about the environment too, right? About the economy. It's about so much more than just the women who largely do this work and really like boxing it in. I think is not giving it the opportunity to be as funded as it could be. So I would just encourage people in philanthropy to kind of think out of the box a little bit, come to us, the experts, talk to Mary, talk to Audria, talk to myself about care work and all of the different issues that intersect and that it affects, because I think there'd be some surprises there.
Great.
Can I just say exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point on what Jen said? Support the coalition, the building that's already there, and, you know, come to the people who are doing this work.
Great. Mary, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, no, I concur. Like, I really feel like we need more people speaking out for the childcare workers. And in order for you to do that, you're going to have to come and talk to us and figure out what it is that we need, even though we're saying we need the same thing as everybody else. Hear us on the same level. That's pretty much it. We would like to be included when the government is giving money to the schools and to all of these private organizations. Like, childcare workers would like to be included and not be an afterthought.
Great point to wrap up on. Obviously there are more questions, so we couldn't get to all of the audience questions. So we did get to as many as we could. Thank you for your questions. And most of all, thanks to our panelists, Audria Powell, from Cooperative Home Care Associates, Jen Stowe from National Domestic Workers Alliance, and Mary Wilder from Shine Nurture Center and Co-op Cincy. Thanks so much for all of your contributions. Look forward to continuing the conversation. Feel free to use the hashtag rebuild the economy, and please do complete the evaluation after the webinar. We do read those, and it's really helpful for future webinars. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.